Hey everyone, and welcome to number 3 of our needs framework videos in our fundamental concept series from Seek and Find Life. This video is going to be on needs fulfillment. And so going back again to our goals for Seek and Find Life is number 1, to bring needs into awareness. And then number 2 is to empower people to fulfill their needs. So if you've been following along in this little video group, then the previous one on the needs framework was on awareness. This one is going to be about fulfilling our needs. So this one is going to be more related to the second goal, which is empowering people to fulfill their needs. And again, the reason we want to do that is because when people have their needs fulfilled, we believe they're going to be happy, they're going to be loving, they're going to be giving, and that's what we want. And so going to our framework here, I'm going to put another piece of that framework back in. And this is what I like to call needs connection. In other words, everything's connected. You can see here, there's kind of like a complete circuit, a full loop going on here. And so our needs are giving rise to our feelings. Our feelings are being identified by our thoughts, going back to their underlying need. And then we're taking a behavior that's going to fulfill our need. And then when that behavior fulfills our need, then we're going to feel happy. And that's wonderful. And so I always like to go back to the physical examples. I feel it's quite helpful. Is let's take hunger, right? Okay, so I have a need. My body needs food. That's going to give rise to a feeling called hunger. And that hungry feeling is going to give rise to a thought. Oh, I should get lunch, or, I should go get a sandwich, or whatever it is. And then that thought is going to give rise to a behavior. You're actually going to go and get lunch. You're actually going to go and make a sandwich or whatever it is. And then when you eat that sandwich, then your need gets fulfilled and you're going to feel happy. You're going to feel satisfied. And that feeling of hunger is also going to go away. So when the needs get fulfilled, a couple things are going to happen. Is number one, your feeling that was triggered by that underlying need, that was caused by that underlying need, is now going to go away. So the hunger is going to go away. And then a new feeling is going to come in of one of getting your needs fulfilled. You might be satisfied, you might be happy, different kinds of things. But anyways, in any case, you're going to have the previous feeling that was caused by the unfulfilled need. That feeling is going to go away. And then it's going to get replaced by a happy feeling, a needs fulfilled kind of feeling. Alrighty. Next, we're going to go over something I like to call needs disconnection. And this can happen a lot, right? And so here you can see that we don't have a closed loop, right? We don't have a complete connection. We have a disconnect. We have somewhere along the line, there was a missing link in the chain, and then suddenly things didn't work out. So in this case, our needs are giving rise to feelings, right? So I'm hungry, and my body had a need for food, and it told me, hey, I want to let you know, so now you're going to be hungry. But then my thoughts misinterpreted this, right? And so now my thoughts gave rise to a behavior that ultimately didn't fulfill my needs. And because of that, I don't feel so good, right? And so I had given the example before in the physical realm. Sometimes when we get dehydrated, if we're not really clear that we're thirsty, I've heard that sometimes in older folks this can happen, is we'll get another kind of symptom. So you might get dehydrated, but you don't feel thirsty, but you get like a headache. And you don't know what caused the headache. You don't realize that it was from drinking a glass of water. And so because you didn't realize that was the cause of the headache, then you might have tried to do something else, right? Maybe you tried to take a nap, maybe you took some aspirin, something like that. But because you were trying to treat the feeling, or you're trying to treat the symptom and not the quote unquote disease or the underlying cause, in this case, one of your body needing water, then ultimately the headache didn't go away. So you might take the aspirin and the headache might go away for a while, but after the aspirin wears off, it's still going to be there if you didn't get water in the meantime or some kind of liquid. If you go to take a nap, it might kind of distract you from the headache. It might help, the headache get a little bit duller, so it's not as bad because you're resting, you're not, thinking about it as much. But the underlying need is still there, and so the feeling is still there because of that. And so a lot of times what can happen is we have a need, and then that creates a feeling. But then when it creates the feeling, we weren't clear on what the underlying need was. And so we had some thoughts that are disconnected from our feelings and needs. And then those thoughts gave rise to behavior that ultimately did not fulfill the need, right? And so then you have this kind of disconnected chart, like a little kind of unhappy face here, because when our needs are unfulfilled, then a couple of things are going to happen. Number one, we're not going to feel so good just in general. And it can look different ways, but just in a general way, you're not going to feel super good. And number two, that feeling that was caused by the underlying need is going to get worse, right? It's going to either stay. Sometimes it's kind of low grade, so you might not notice it getting worse, but at the very least, it's not going to go away, right? It's going to get worse. And so that's just kind of an overview of this. And I wanted to take a second to kind of talk through some specific versions of what I'm going to call unproductive behavior. And again, we're going to go through a few of these things here. And I just want to mention, we're not psychologists, we're not licensed mental health professionals. And so with these definitions, these are not like textbook definitions. A lot of these are like working definitions. They're just, hey, things that are helpful for us to understand what's going on, and maybe even specific to our program. But anyways, so the first one I want to go over is unproductive behavior. And what we're calling unproductive behavior is just any kind of behavior or thinking pattern that does not fulfill our needs. And just to mention, if you're really careful about this, you'll be like, hey, David, you're saying unproductive behavior, but then you're including thinking in here. Yeah, that's true. Generally, we talk about behavior, but it can kind of include thinking patterns as well. But just to give it kind of like a simple name, we just call it unproductive behavior, but it's kind of including thinking patterns as well. But going back to the definition, a behavior or thinking pattern that does not fulfill our needs. So it doesn't necessarily mean it's bad, right? So like, for example, with the headache example, let's say you're dehydrated, you had headaches, so you went to go take a nap. So number one, there's nothing wrong with taking a nap for sure, right? Number two, it might actually be fulfilling another need that you had if you were really tired, and now that need's getting fulfilled, which is great. But the issue is that the need that caused the feeling is not getting fulfilled, right? Or in this case, the need that's causing the headache is not getting fulfilled. And so the thing that prompted you to take that behavior is not going to get fulfilled. And that's the real issue that we're talking about here, is it's unproductive because the behavior that you took did not fulfill the need that prompted the behavior. So that's why we call it disconnected, right? Is because the feeling was disconnected, or the need was disconnected from the behavior that you took in order to maybe try and fulfill it, or at least that's the thought. So now I'm going to talk about some specific versions of unproductive behaviors, right? This is kind of the umbrella, and there's some versions of this that are pretty common. So one subset is things that are actually counterproductive. So an unproductive behavior is just anything that does not actively contribute to fulfilling the need. This is a behavior. A counterproductive behavior is a behavior or thinking pattern that actually makes an unfulfilled need worse, right? So this is, and usually on accident, right? Nobody, I think, does this intentionally, but it's just because we weren't really clear. We didn't really understand what was going on. We accidentally did something, unintentionally did something that actually makes the unfulfilled needs even worse. And so one example might be, I don't know if anybody does this, but I'm just going to give the example, is if you're hungry and then you went on like a 3-mile run, right? And that's only going to make you even more hungry, right? Now, of course, there's nothing wrong with going on a 3-mile run, but the only issue with it is if you're running, on empty, and that's when you start the run, then how are you going to feel when you get to the end of it, right? And so if you'd gone on this 3-mile run and you were already hungry at the beginning, then you're probably going to feel like even really weak and really tired and really hungry at the end of it, and be like, hey, if you weren't clear on what's going on, you'd be like, hey, like, I'm really confused. Like, why do I feel so bad? So this is counterproductive behavior. This is something that's actually going to make the original need worse. The next one I want to talk about briefly is coping mechanism. And again, going back to what I said earlier, I believe there's a number of different definitions of what a coping mechanism is in the psychological world. So you can just take this as like a little seek and find life specific definition. This is just our little definition. But how we define a coping mechanism is a behavior or thinking pattern that is directed at our feelings rather than our needs, right? And so if I'm using the physical example again, going back to the headache based on dehydration, is if I go and take an aspirin, basically what I'm trying to do is solve my symptom, not solve my underlying need. And again, not usually because I'm trying to ignore my need, usually because I just wasn't clear on what it was. I didn't really understand what the actual cause was. And so I misinterpreted and tried to solve the symptom with something, but it's not going to ultimately fix the symptom because the underlying cause, the underlying need is still there, right? And so this is a subset of unproductive behavior, but it's a very common subset of unproductive behavior. And that's why I wanted to kind of break it out individually here. And so what I'd actually like to do is go back through these a little bit and talk about some versions of them in the emotional realm, right? So I had just gone through and done a few kind of physical examples, but now we can go back and give some emotional examples to help give some color to what we're talking about in the emotional or psychological realm. And so I'm actually going to use the same example that I had used in another video regarding being lonely, right? So let's say you're at a party or just like kind of a gathering, a friend's place with some friends, and just for whatever reason, you're just feeling kind of like lonely. Like you don't really feel like talking to people, you're kind of sad, you're kind of depressed, right? And so now you're having these thoughts like, hey, I'm standing over here in the corner and like no one's talking to me and like I feel sad and like everybody else is having fun but me and this is not super great, right? And so one thing that you could do is you could recognize, hey, this is what's going on for me. Let me go find, my best friend or the person that I know the best here and go start talking to them, right? And then, hey, maybe it turns out that after you start doing that and like you meet some people and then you start talking to them, you're like, oh, actually, this is kind of fun, right? I'm glad that I wasn't like stuck over there in the corner like I was. Or maybe, you leave the party and then you call another friend and you're just like, hey, would you mind talking for a little bit? I'm feeling kind of lonely, right? And your friend's like, yeah, sure, what's going on? And you just want to talk it out and just, after you talk to them for maybe 15 or 20 minutes, you just feel a lot better. And so this could be you had a need for connection, right? And so then you were feeling kind of lonely, and that was letting you know, hey, you have a need, you have an emotional need that's not getting met here. And so that gave you some thoughts that presented as, hey, like everybody else is having fun, I'm not having fun, I'm sitting over here in the corner, I'm sad, right? And so then you took a behavior that was actually going to help meet your need, right? And we'll talk a little bit more about needs fulfillment in a specific way, but right now I'm just trying to present an overview of the basic idea in the emotional side or the psychological and emotional side. Okay, so let's take another example, and we'll do examples for each one of these, but I'll just do a general one right now. We'll use the same example is, hey, I'm at my friend's place, people are hanging out, people are talking, and I had a need. I had a need for connection and it wasn't getting met. And so then it gave me this feeling, hey, I'm feeling kind of lonely. And so I'm starting to think these thoughts, right? Of like, hey, like I'm so sad and hey, like everyone's having fun but me. And so then I decide, you know what, I'm just gonna go home. Like this isn't doing it for me. This isn't fun for me. I'm just gonna go home. And so you decided to go home, but unfortunately that need wasn't met. Now, I do want to mention here, if you had watched the previous video on stimulus versus cause, you are taking the stimulus away, right? And so that is probably going to quote unquote help, right? And again, this goes back to the whole thing of like treating the symptom and not treating the problem. In other words, like I'm taking aspirin for the headache, but I didn't drink the water. Is, hey, like because I'm not at the party and I'm not like right in front of a bunch of other people having fun talking to each other, I'm going to feel better in the sense that it's that need that I had is not going to be as aware, right? I'm not going to be as aware of that need. It's not going to be as present for me when I'm at home because I'm not seeing a bunch of other people have more fun than I am, right? But the important thing here is that the underlying need is still not getting met, right? And so even though you've taken away the trigger, you've taken away the stimulus, you're not at the party where you're like watching people have fun without you, and you're now at home, but you still don't feel connected to anybody. So now you're probably at home, but you're still not feeling that great, right? And again, it could be in a low grade way. I'm not saying it's like super duper obvious, but all I'm saying is that the underlying need never got met. And so just because you're taking the stimulus away, just because you're taking the trigger away, doesn't necessarily mean that the problem is solved. It just means that the feeling is not as present for you, right? So this is a way that the need has been unfulfilled. Is you took an action, but the action didn't fulfill the need. It was more just taking away what was stimulating the feeling. And so this is what I would call an unproductive behavior, right? Because you're taking away the stimulus, right? But you're not ultimately fulfilling the need. So this is a behavior that has not fulfilled the need. A counterproductive behavior is, let's say that you have a need for a connection, right? And you're feeling kind of sad, you're feeling kind of lonely, you're feeling kind of depressed. And then somebody comes in and they say, hey, like, you're looking kind of down. Do you want to talk about it? And you're like, no, just leave me alone, right? So actually, and again, like no one does this intentionally, right? But what has happened unintentionally is you've taken a behavior that's actually been counterproductive to your need, right? You need a connection, and then that came up as a feeling, kind of a feeling of loneliness, a feeling of sadness. You had some thoughts like, hey, like no one cares about me, this sucks, right? And then somebody wanted to connect with you, right? They came in like, hey, you're feeling down, I want to connect with you, right? They didn't use those words, but hey, how are you doing, right? And then you behaved unintentionally, probably also automatically, like without thinking about it. You behaved in a way that like cut off that opportunity for connection. You're like, hey, just leave me alone, right? Just stop it. And because we weren't really clear on what our need was, maybe because our behavior became very automatic in a way that just ended up being counterproductive, because we maybe haven't learned how to meet our own needs and express ourselves in a way that's productive, then on accident, unintentionally, we've done something that actually has not fulfilled our need and maybe even made the chances of getting our needs fulfilled worse, and has maybe even effectively made our need worse because we've created, what sometimes is called a self-fulfilling prophecy, which is you're thinking to yourself, hey, nobody cares about me, nobody likes me, but then unintentionally, accidentally, and maybe even automatically, you behaved in a way that's actually made people actually not like you, right? Just because of what happened. And so then you're like, see, I knew it, nobody likes me, right? And so this can be kind of end up in somewhat of a vicious cycle. And we'll talk a little bit more about that probably in another video, but at least I just wanted to mention here, like this is an example of counterproductive behavior, is you've done something that actually doesn't meet your need and even makes it worse. The next is a coping mechanism, and this is really common, so actually we talked in another video about procrastination. So procrastination almost always results in some kind of coping mechanism, usually a distraction. And so this is a behavior or thinking pattern that's directed at our feelings rather than our needs, and does not fulfill the need. And a lot of times this looks like some kind of avoidance behavior, right? And so maybe, I'm sad, I'm feeling lonely, and so then I'm going to go like watch YouTube videos to distract myself, or I'm going to play some games to distract myself, or I'm going to like watch some TV, or, something like this. And that kind of like quote unquote gets my mind off of it, right? So I'm not thinking about my feeling as much. And that might be true. It might actually be somewhat effective at that, and that's good. But the problem is that the underlying need is not met. And so because the underlying need is not met, and you're like kind of quote unquote treating the feeling, is the feeling might get better a little bit, at least for a period of time, but ultimately the problem doesn't get fixed, right? The cause of the feeling is not getting fulfilled, not getting dealt with. So then the feeling is still going to come back, right? Oftentimes it'll come back stronger or get worse. Again, it can be in a low grade way. Some of these things, it's not like hunger where it's like if you don't do it for a day, then it's like becomes super duper obvious. Some of these things, it might, it could even go on for months, or in some cases, unfortunately, for years. And it's just kind of like slowly building, right? And so it's not like it's going to be like super duper obvious, like, hey, this need didn't get met. And so tomorrow, like it became like super obvious to me. And sometimes it's like for 5 years or 10 years, right? This has kind of been going on in a low grade way, but it never got handled. And so now, like 10 years later, it's showing up as anxiety, it's showing up as stress, it's showing up as depression, or in all these kinds of ways, just because there was this need that never got met for like a really long period of time. And there were all these behaviors that were, directed at feelings or directed in other directions that ultimately didn't fulfill the need. And so this is a really common behavior pattern that we see is some kind of coping mechanism, some kind of avoidance behavior. A lot of times this is like distractions, procrastination, quote unquote time wasters, is you went on your phone, you went on social media, you went to watch YouTube, you like whatever it is, right? But basically whatever it was just like, hey, like whenever I think about this, I kind of get anxious and I don't like thinking about it. So I'm going to like get my mind off of it to something else. But actually, that anxiety that you have when you think about this negative thing is actually letting you know that there's an underlying need that's not fulfilled. And you can get your mind off of it, and there's nothing wrong with that. But the concern that we have is that the underlying need is not fulfilled. And so it's ultimately not going to get better. And that's really what we're concerned about, is helping get the needs fulfilled, helping handle the underlying cause, and then actually that trigger will no longer stimulate the same feeling. You won't get anxious when you think about it anymore. And so ultimately what we're looking for is productive behavior, right? That's a big goal for us, is to get out of unproductive behaviors and get people towards productive behaviors, productive thinking patterns. And this is simply any behavior or thinking pattern that fulfills our needs, right? And so that's what we had talked about earlier in the video, about when you're hungry, go get some food. When you're needing connection, then find some ways that are helpful, that are going to get you the connection that you need. And again, we'll talk more about like specific strategies on fulfilling needs later. This is more just to present the basic idea of what is unproductive versus productive behavior. And so as a quick review, this is what unproductive behavior looks like, right? We had a need, that need produced a feeling, but then we had some thoughts, probably the thoughts were also related to the feeling, but the real problem is that the behavior got disconnected, right? And so whatever we did is not ultimately fulfilling the need. That's counterproductive behavior, that's unproductive behavior, which includes counterproductive behavior. That includes coping mechanisms. It includes any kind of behavior or thinking pattern where our needs are basically not getting met. But what we're looking for needs connection, right? Is this closed loop is productive behavior where needs are getting fulfilled, which means I had a need, I was hungry, I had a need, my body needs food. It produced a feeling, I'm hungry. That feeling produced a thought, hey, I should get lunch. That produced a behavior. I actually went and got lunch, and then I got food, and now I'm happy, right? And now that negative, or not negative, but that feeling that was associated with the underlying need of hunger, of needing food, now went away. It got replaced with a positive feeling, and everything's good, right? And again, as humans, we have needs, and it's not like I eat once in my life, right? And so these are something that we're constantly being aware of, being made aware of, and then constantly fulfilling. I don't know if you've ever heard the phrase, you know that I love you, why do I have to say it? Or why do you need me to say it? Well, to me, it's kind of like saying, oh, you need food, why do you have to eat every day? I just fed you yesterday, right? Well, that's true, but my body just needs food every day. That's just how it is, right? And emotionally, right, I need to hear that like I'm loved and I'm cared for, and I need connection, and I need to have, connection with other people on a regular basis. It's not like I had one really, intimate conversation, really connected conversation with someone 3 years ago, and suddenly like I'm okay today. It's just something that I need on a regular basis, just like food, just like water, just like sleep, all these things. And so, that's something that we talk about at Seek and Find Life, is wanting to build that ritual, those habits that are going to make sure that your emotional needs are met on a regular basis. And then you're going to be hopefully a happy, loving, giving human being on this earth. And that's wonderful. I think that's it for this video. So as always, we love feedback. If you have any questions, you didn't understand something, you have any concerns, go ahead and comment on this video. Email me at david@seekandfind.life, and we hope to see you for our next video.